Basically, I'll offer a few thoughts from my own tradition, the Hindu tradition, since I found so much that I affirm and I enthusiastically agree with and welcome from the Pope's encyclical. But let me just start, where I see the document as foundational, because I saw everything coming back to an essential understanding of the nature of the divine and the nature of what it means to be human and the nature of the divine. This is the foundation as I read the document and I listen to Father James, upon which everything else stands and everything else is affirmed. So in my own tradition, the Hindu tradition, we have a very simple, but at the same time, very profound definition of the divine that goes back to the primary sacred text, the Vedas, where the divine is described as that from which all beings originate, by which they are sustained, and to which they return. That from which all beings originate, that by which they are sustained, and that to which they return. It is clear, from Father James and the Pope's encyclical, and of course, as I said, the Hindu tradition, that the divine is not a national or a tribal deity of a particular religious or ethnic community, but the source of all life, the source of all existence. And in addition, the Hindu tradition, in a very special way, emphasizes, and this is something that is, runs through all of our sacred texts, not only the divine as the source of all life, the source of all existence, of course, and with the implication that human beings constitute a single community, but the affirmation without qualification that this divine being exists equally in all beings. In the Bhagavad Gita, for example, we have the text that God dwells in the heart of all beings, dwells identically and equally in every living being. So there is no life outside of God. There is nothing that exists that is not sustained by God. God is the unifying reality present in the entire creation, the singular truth, permeating, uniting, and sustaining all existence. And this brings me to the point, that I want to emphasize initially, because again, this echoes throughout the encyclical, that from the Hindu theological understanding, the equal presence of God in all beings is the source of the inherent dignity and equal worth of every human being. It invites us to a response of reverence towards all beings. The value of the human being is not derived from the state. It is not reducible to economic or political considerations. It is intrinsic, and it flows from the fact that the human being is the abode of the divine. So we can't honor God and devalue human beings. We can't be indifferent to the conditions of their lives. We cannot give our assent or to any social or cultural system that is founded on human indignity or human inequality. And we live with so many such systems. We still struggle with patriarchy, to see women as inferior to men, to prefer the boy child over the girl child, to ill-treat the elderly, a point that is made in the encyclical to ascribe unequal worth or to demean people on the basis of birth is all in fundamental contradiction to this, to the sacred worth of all human beings. And I think in my tradition, the singular ethical value that most eloquently expresses this reverence for life, for the sacredness of human beings, is non-injury. In Sanskrit, we have the word ahimsa, which is, in all of our teaching, the cardinal ethical principle. We associate this very much with Mahatma Gandhi. In his understanding of ahimsa, Gandhi explained that in its negative form, it means abstention from inflicting harm or abstention from hurting others. But in its positive form, he said that ahimsa is compassion. In Sanskrit, it is daya for every human being. For Gandhi also, non-injury included justice and freedom from exploitation of others. Essentially, it is to identify with others in suffering and in joy, in their flourishing. We have a beautiful phrase, para dukkha dukkha sukha sukha, to be one with others in suffering and in joy. So that I think that this theological commitment or this theological understanding of the intrinsic dignity of living beings that flows from the divine indwelling equally in every person requires us, if I put it in this way, when we seek to translate it into an active way of being, and we had some discussion before about, how do we translate the Pope's encyclical into a way of action. I think that at least one of the important obligations that such a theology requires of us is that we properly inquire into the causes of suffering, structural and otherwise, with the aim of overcoming these. So we can't ignore the suffering of human beings. And this brings me to the issue of poverty. We can't ignore the suffering of human beings when they lack necessities for dignified and decent living, or when suffering is inflicted through oppression or injustice based on gender, birth, or race. So working to overcome suffering is an obligation of our understanding of human sacredness, human sanctity. This requires us to identify the political, social, and economic structures that cause and perpetuate suffering. And I think this was also fundamental to Gandhi's understanding. At one time, he said, no human being could be actively non-violent and not rise against social injustice, no matter where it occurred. So this requires a commitment to what the encyclical speaks of as the common good. And I want to say something briefly on this. In one of the Hindu sacred texts, which is the Bhagavad Gita, I spoke a little previously about the Vedas. The Sanskrit equivalent for the universal common good is the word loka sangraha. Loka means the entire existing world or the entire existing universe. It includes human beings, but of course it includes, it's much more expansive and inclusive. It includes the world of nature, the natural world. So commitment to what we speak of as loka sangraha, the universal well-being, the well-being of all, does not allow us and should not allow us to privilege unjustly the interests of a particular institution, nation, religious tradition, ethnic or gender group. It excludes the pursuit of personal and institutional interests in ways that violently impede the flourishing of others. It excludes trying to lift oneself or one's nation or one's own community by crushing another. So I think Loka Sangraha ensures that virtues are not privatized, but applied publicly for justice, for peace, for the flourishing of all. This common good that the encyclical speaks about is not served by an economic system that depletes our natural resources, eradicates our biodiversity, adversely affects our climate. So the public good, Loka Sangraha, becomes the measure of the meaning of all that we do. And this is exactly what the Bhagavad Gita says. In all things, in all actions, consider the universal common good. Consider Loka Sangraha. I think there is also a common, a shared connection in the encyclical and in the Hindu tradition, which is the understanding of the unity and interdependent character of our existence. Not only, do we come from a single source, and that source is present equally and identically in each one of us, but our lives are inextricably connected with each other. And there is a beautiful text again, from the Vedas, which describe, at least gives an order of the emergence of the universe from the divine, one of the creation texts, if I would describe it in that way. The first to emerge from the divine is space. Then from space comes air or atmosphere. From air comes heat or fire. From fire comes water. From water comes the earth. And from the earth comes vegetation. From vegetation, food. And after food, the text says living beings. Human beings are formed from food. The point in this text is that we are formed of the universe. We represent it in our universe, in our bodies. It is present. We are organically connected with it. The earth is in everything solid in our bodies. Water is in everything that is liquid. Fire in the body's warmth. Air in our breath. We embody the universe, in our very existence. The dualistic language that speaks of human beings and nature as separate realities is both false and I think dangerous. It is false because we are an organic and integral part of the natural world, made from and embodying it in our very existence. We do not exist independently. And it is dangerous also because it objectifies the natural world and contributes to the belief that we can destroy it without destroying ourselves. So one of the important teachings of the Hindu tradition as it relates to this idea of interdependent existence is that it describes every human being as a being or as a person born into debt, D-E-B-T, debt. We are indebted. At birth itself, we are indebted. In Sanskrit, we have the word rinam, which means an indebted being. We are indebted beings. To be human is to be indebted. one does not develop one's human potential outside of a human community. So the tradition therefore says, if you are an indebted being, who are the beings to whom you are indebted? And it lists, a number of important beings. So we are indebted to God, to parents, ancestors, to teachers, to our human caregivers, and to the natural world. We exist and we have the potential to flourish because we're part of a generous and supportive, interdependent world. So the proper response to this understanding of our unity, our indebtedness, and interdependence is commitment to the common good. Commitment to the common good. As again, the Bhagavad Gita says, that if you take from the universe without returning anything, then you are living as a thief. You are, in fact, a thief. So we have to live generously because we are constant recipients of the gifts of others. And so finally, I just comment a little bit again, coming back to the issue of poverty, just to connect my own tradition with the encyclical and Father James's comments. The Hindu tradition identifies, 4 goals for a good human life, for a flourishing human life. And these include virtue, the practice of virtue, wealth, pleasure, and spirituality. Dharma, kama, artha, and moksha. Now, contrary to many popular impressions, the Hindu tradition is not life-denying or narrowly otherworldly. It has never given its blessings to involuntary poverty. It recognizes poverty as a great cause of suffering and includes material well-being as one of the essential goals for dignified and a flourishing life. But these 4 goals balance each other. The goal of virtue emphasizes the social and relational context in which we live our lives and our need to set boundaries to all our pursuits so that others can also flourish. One of the things that I want to mention, which I didn't get that very much, coming prominently in the encyclical, is the fact that in addressing the issue of poverty in our contemporary world, we have to grapple with the growth of corporate power and wealth, which has been phenomenal. Their domination of the world economy is unprecedented. Just to give you an example, the revenues of Walmart surpass those of 157 countries in our world. 51 of the largest economies in the world are global corporations. 49 are countries. So the number of global corporations, or the wealth of global corporations, exceed the wealth of nations. And although enjoying many of the rights and privileges of individual persons and wealth and power that surpass nations, corporations have not consistently concerned themselves with the common good. So we can speak about, the responsibility of the political responsibility of nations, but I think this is something that a reality that we need also to address, because of the global nature of corporations, the rights and powers they enjoy are exercised often by shareholders who have no concern for the good of local communities, because very often they live thousands and thousands of miles away from where these corporations are operating or where they establish operations. And the sole measure of many of these corporations is the maximization of profit and market share. towards this end, what Pope Francis speaks of as consumerism. Consumerism is encouraged. Relentless advertising generates artificial desires for more and more products to the long-term detriment of the since corporations, at least as legal entities, did not exist during the early history of most of our religious traditions. Our teachings and our teachers did not speak directly about their responsibilities to offer specific perspectives. But religious traditions are eloquent about the fundamental causes of human suffering and offer visions of the good life for all. And I think that when we speak about poverty, we have to ask how should we address corporate power and corporate influence and the role of corporations, both in causing suffering, but also perhaps of overcoming suffering in our world. Because when the maximization of profits become the sole concern with little or no concern for the common good, then there is a problem. If I put it in this way, when greed is institutionalized, then the common good is impeded. We are very good, I think, in our religious traditions about identifying the problem of greed at the individual level. But how do we speak about greed at the corporate level, where so much damage and so much suffering is concerned? So we have to extend our analysis, the deep religious analysis, I think, to speak about global corporations because of the suffering and the potential to cause suffering much more than individuals can do. And we must do that because we are concerned about the common good. So finally, I reference Gandhi, and let's just end with a comment. He spoke about the need for economics to be infused with an ethical concern and focus. He said, true economics never militates against the highest ethical standard, and all true ethics, to be worth its nature, at the same time must also be good economics. So bringing back, ethics and economics, it becomes an important need. I remember, I had many discussions with Jeff Sachs, the Columbia economics teacher, and he always lamented the fact, and he said, in none of the graduate programs in the United States, and I think elsewhere in the world, none of the graduate programs in economics require students to take courses in ethics. Economics is taught completely independent of ethical concerns. And for us in this seminar, ethical concerns, of course, go back to the common good. So when you teach economic leaders, but you don't require them to think about ethics, I think we have a very big moral problem in our hands, and the effects of which we are still seeing in our world.